The room was still and dim, the first pale light of dawn slipping through the blinds of a small countryside clinic. Dr. Lara Brooks pushed the door open, her coat damp from the rain, and froze. There, on the step, lay a young bobcat, trembling. She bent down, scooped the frail creature into her arms, and felt it at once. A heartbeat so faint it barely reached her fingertips. The body was ice cold. The breaths were shallow, ragged. Inside, the clinic was quiet, the smell of disinfectant lingering from the night before. Alara hurried to the exam table, wrapping the little animal in a warm towel, clicking on the lamp that washed them both in soft yellow light. Its fur was matted with mud, whiskers twitching weakly as she checked the temperature. She whispered, barely above a breath, "Oh, you poor thing. What happened to you?" There was no collar, no tag, nothing to suggest that anyone had ever claimed this wild, wounded soul. Alara had spent years here on the edge of town, patching up strays, rescues, lost pets. But a bobcat? Never. Her first thought was to reach for the phone, call the local wildlife rehab center. Then it happened, a low, fragile sound, half meow, half whimper, that made her hand freeze in midair. She looked down at the creature's glassy eyes and said softly, "All right, we'll figure this out together." She worked in silence, careful and deliberate, cleaning each wound so gently the bobcat hardly stirred. He flinched once, then stayed still, as if he understood that she was trying to help. By the time the fluids were in and the antiviral shot done, his breathing had steadied just enough to give her hope. Alara slipped a heating pad under the towel, laid another across his back, and sat beside the table, tea in hand, watching, waiting. Outside, the storm clouds finally drifted apart. A single ray of sunlight pierced the gray sky and landed on the sleeping bobcat like a blessing. That's when she gave him a name. "Luna," she whispered. "After the moonlight that's kept me company on nights like this, you're not just any wild cat. You're a survivor." The days passed, and Luna grew stronger. He began to eat on his own, testing his legs, exploring the small enclosure she'd built in the back room. But the thing that surprised her most wasn't the recovery. It was the calm. No signs of aggression, no fear. If anything, a quiet, curious presence. Whenever a new patient arrived, an injured stray, a frightened kitten, Luna would lift his head to watch from behind the glass divider. One chilly afternoon, Alara was treating a half-frozen tabby kitten. She noticed Luna pacing near the divider, chirping softly, almost as if he could feel the tiny creature's pain. She gave a tired little laugh. "You're not just my patient anymore, huh?" Over the next few days, the kitten began to heal. Alara would often find Luna sitting beside its cage, silent, watchful, until the little one drifted off to sleep. Something about his presence soothed the others. And that's when it dawned on her. Luna wasn't only healing, he was helping her heal others. Weeks later, he had already become part of the clinic's routine. Every morning, as Alara unlocked the front door, Luna would be waiting by the reception counter, tail flicking lazily, golden eyes half closed in that slow, patient blink. He no longer stayed in a cage. He didn't need to. Somehow, everyone who stepped inside the small clinic could feel it. The calm, quiet presence of something wild, yet gentle. Nervous animals settled faster when Luna was nearby. A trembling puppy would stop shaking the moment he lay beside it. Even the old cranky cats, the ones that hissed at everything, simply stared at him in silence. It was as if Luna carried with him a promise, unspoken but felt by all. "You're safe here." One quiet afternoon, the clinic door burst open. A man rushed in, his hands cradling a shoebox wrapped in an old towel. Inside lay a kitten, tiny, soaked, barely breathing. "She was in the ditch," the man stammered. "I think she's gone." Alara's heart tightened. She cleared a space on the table, her movements swift but gentle. The kitten's body was cold, limp, the temperature dangerously low. The man's voice cracked. Should we put her down?" Alara paused, her eyes on the tiny chest that struggled to rise and fall. "Let's give her 24 hours, she said softly. She began the delicate work, heating pad beneath, fluids to warm her veins, oxygen tube fitted gently to her nose. Every second felt like a race against time. Then came a sound. Faint, rhythmic, a chirp. Luna. He had appeared silently from the hallway. The bobcat padded toward the table and settled on the floor beside it, eyes fixed on the fragile life before them. He didn't touch anything, didn't make a sound beyond that soft trill. Yet somehow, the whole room felt steadier, calmer. Alara glanced at him and whispered through her exhaustion, "Okay, Dr. Luna, let's do this together." Hour after hour she worked, her hands steady but her mind heavy with doubt. Luna stayed by her side the entire time, a silent sentinel. At last, when she placed the kitten on a soft blanket near the window, Luna followed, curling his body protectively around the tiny survivor, shielding it from the draft. The hours dragged on. Then, just as the first rays of dusk crept in, the kitten stirred. Its chest rose, fell, and then rose again, stronger this time. Alara blinked back tears of relief. "You did it," she whispered. Luna simply blinked in return, his tail wrapping gently around the kitten. From that day on, it became routine. If an anxious animal arrived, Luna would appear. If a patient whimpered during treatment, he pressed just close enough to be felt, never close enough to scare. Even the owners seemed to relax in his presence. He wasn't just a rescued bobcat anymore. He had become the heart of the clinic. Word of the gentle bobcat spread quickly across town. Some thought it was nothing but a story, a rumor about a vet who had somehow tamed a wild heart. But those who had stood in that little exam room, who had watched Luna sit quietly beside a trembling creature, knew the truth. It wasn't about taming. It was about trust. One chilly morning, an elderly woman named Margaret stepped into the clinic. She clutched a frail calico cat wrapped tightly in a faded blanket. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "She hasn't eaten in 3 days. She's all I have left since my husband passed." Alara saw the pain behind those words. She examined the cat. Severe dehydration, organ strain. Not much time left. Moments like these were always the hardest, where science meets heartbreak. "We'll do what we can," she said gently. Luna entered the room without a sound. His tail lowered, ears slightly forward, a quiet respect for the scene. Margaret gasped softly at the sight of him. Is that a bobcat?" Alara managed a small smile. "He's family." Luna stepped closer, pausing only when the elderly woman extended her trembling hand. Instead of pulling away, he lowered his head, pressing gently against her palm. Margaret's eyes welled with tears. "He's so calm." Throughout the treatment, Luna remained nearby, eyes half closed, breathing slow and steady. That calm rhythm seemed to ease the air in the room. Margaret whispered with a faint smile, "You're helping her, aren't you?" The calico's breathing eased, not cured, not yet, but peaceful. When Margaret left that day, she turned to Alara and said softly, "I came here to save my cat, but I think he saved me." That night, when the clinic finally went quiet, Alara sank to the floor beside Luna. The soft hum of the heater filled the silence. She rested her back against the counter, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You feel it too." don't you?" "When they're hurting," Luna turned his head at the sound of her voice. In the glow of the lantern, his golden eyes shimmered, deep, steady, almost knowing. Alara reached out, scratching gently behind his ear. For a moment, the world felt still. No ringing phones, no paperwork, just the quiet heartbeat of trust between a human and something wild. The months passed, and Alara began to notice something remarkable. Luna's instincts went far beyond simple comfort. Often, before an emergency arrived, he would already be pacing near the treatment room, restless, alert, as if he could sense when pain was about to enter through the front door. It was uncanny. It was unexplainable. It was real. He was no longer just her patient. He had become her partner. It happened late one winter evening. The clinic had closed for the night. Outside, snow fell in heavy sheets, tapping softly against the windows. Alara was finishing her paperwork, the last cup of tea growing cold on the desk. Luna lay curled near the heater, dozing, until suddenly he lifted his head. His ears flicked forward, his body went tense. "What is it, boy?" she murmured. Luna let out a sharp chirp, nothing like his usual soft trill. He bounded toward the back door, pressing his nose hard against the glass, staring out into the storm. Alara frowned, slipping on her coat and grabbing a flashlight. The Bobcat's strange urgency told her something was wrong. She followed him into the snow. The icy wind cut through her gloves as Luna led the way, stopping every few feet to glance back, making sure she was still there. Then she heard it. A sound so faint it was almost lost in the howl of the wind. A cry, weak, frightened, close. They moved behind the clinic, the beam of the flashlight sweeping across the snowdrifts. There, half buried beneath a fallen fence, was a small shape, a young shepherd dog, barely a year old, tangled in a mess of rusty wire. Blood stained the snow around its injured leg. "Oh my God!" Alara gasped, dropping to her knees. Luna paced beside her, growling softly, not in anger, but in urgency, as though urging her to hurry. Her fingers trembled as she cut through the wire with a pocket tool, whispering to calm both herself and the terrified dog. Finally, she freed the poor creature and wrapped it carefully in her coat. Back inside, the battle for the shepherd's life began. The young dog had lost too much blood. Every minute mattered. Alara worked through the night, her hands moving with focus, her heart pounding with worry. Luna never left her side. He stood by the table, alert and steady, his amber eyes fixed on the patient as if keeping watch over them both. Hours passed. Finally, the dog's breathing steadied, weak but alive. Exhausted, Alara leaned back against the counter, rubbing her eyes with shaking hands. Luna jumped up beside her, pressing his head gently against her arm. "You saved him," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I wouldn't have even known he was out there." Outside, snow kept falling, blanketing the quiet town in white. Inside the small clinic, there was only the soft sound of 3 heartbeats, one steady, one fragile, and one wild, but full of devotion. That night, as Alara turned off the lights, she looked back at Luna curled beside the rescued dog. A deep ache of gratitude filled her chest. He wasn't just her companion. He was proof that the world, even in its coldest, harshest moments, still held warmth worth saving. In that snow-covered clinic, a woman and a wild heart had found something rare. Trust without words. By spring, the story of the Bobcat healer had spread far beyond the borders of the small town. Reporters started arriving at the little clinic, their cameras poised, eager to see for themselves the wild creature everyone spoke about in hushed, amazed voices. They asked the same questions again and again. How could a bobcat show such empathy? How could something untamed be so calm, so gentle? Ilara never had the right words for them. She would give a small, almost shy smile and say, "He's just different." He listens to what most of us forget to hear. The townsfolk adored Luna. Children would press their faces to the clinic window, giggling when they caught a glimpse of him lounging near the front desk or padding silently after Dr. Brooks. Even the hardened ranchers, men who had spent their lives chasing predators off their land, found themselves standing quietly in awe, watching the calm, golden-eyed Bobcat as though he were something sacred. But the attention never changed him. Luna remained the same, steady, patient, endlessly gentle. He would sit by the cages of frightened animals, lay his head on a trembling hand, or simply look up at a grieving owner with those slow, blinking amber eyes. Sometimes when a patient didn't make it through the night, Ilara would find him the next morning sitting silently beside the empty bed, as if keeping vigil. Those were the hardest mornings. One such morning, after losing an old dog who had been ill for weeks, Ilara's strength finally broke. She sat on the floor beside the examination table, her head in her hands, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I did everything I could," she whispered. Luna moved toward her without hesitation. He pressed his head gently against her shoulder, his thick fur brushing against her tear-streaked face. The warmth of his presence steadied her breathing. For the first time in years, Ilara let herself cry freely, not as a doctor, but as a human being who had seen too much loss and too little understanding. That night, she realized something profound. Luna wasn't just an animal in her care. He was care itself, a living reminder that healing was more than medicine. Months later, the dog they had rescued on that bitter winter night returned to the clinic for a routine checkup. He was healthy now, tail wagging, eyes bright. When Luna saw him, he let out a soft chirp and stepped forward. The two touched noses in quiet recognition. A moment so simple, yet so full of meaning that Ilara felt her eyes grow misty. A visiting journalist standing nearby asked her, "So, what makes him so special?" Ilara smiled through the tears. "It's not that he understands words. It's that he understands hearts." That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Ilara locked the clinic door and stepped out onto the porch. Luna followed, settling beside her on the wooden step, his fur catching the last streaks of gold in the fading light. The wind carried the scent of fresh spring grass as she whispered, "Do you remember that first day? You were cold, scared, alone, and now, look what you've become." Luna blinked slowly, almost as if he did remember. Together they watched the quiet town lights shimmer in the distance. In the stillness of that moment, the soft rhythm of life itself seemed to echo all around them. Steady, gentle, alive, the years drifted by quietly, like ripples across a calm pond. Seasons changed, faces came and went. But the little clinic remained, warm, alive, with stories of healing and hope. Through it all, Luna stayed. He had grown older, his once sleek fur now dusted with faint silver strands. But his eyes, those deep amber eyes, still carried the same light that had drawn Ilara in on that stormy morning so long ago. He was never really a pet, not quite a wild animal anymore either. He was something in between, a bridge between raw instinct and gentle compassion. Every corner of the clinic held a piece of him. The sun-faded rug where he used to nap in the afternoons, the scratch marks on the counter from his curious paws, the framed photos on the wall, cats, dogs, even children who had once been terrified but somehow found comfort in the presence of a quiet bobcat. One autumn evening, soft drizzle tapped against the clinic windows. Ilara sat at her desk, pen poised over her journal, reflecting on the years behind them. In neat handwriting, she wrote, 8 years today since Luna walked into my life. He taught me more about compassion than any textbook ever could. She looked up from the page, and there he was, curled beside the radiator, tail wrapped neatly around his paws. He blinked at her once, slow, deliberate, then rested his head back down. In that small, unspoken gesture, she understood. Luna had never been just a patient who stayed. He was her teacher, her anchor, a living reminder that healing wasn't always about saving lives. Sometimes it was simply about being there. Outside, thunder rumbled low in the distance. Alara smiled faintly to herself. "Another storm, huh?" she whispered. "Guess that's how it always begins with us." That night, before locking up, she made one last walk around the clinic. Her hand brushed over the examination table, the same place where she had first laid him all those years ago. Fragile, cold, fighting to survive. Softly, she said, "Thank you." Luna stirred at the sound of her voice. He stretched his tired limbs, padded over to her side, and brushed against her leg. When he looked up at her, his amber eyes seemed to hold every soul they had helped, every moment of silent understanding they had shared. Alara knelt to stroke the silver along his fur. In that quiet, a narrator's voice would gently fade in. "They say every healer needs healing too. Sometimes it doesn't come from medicine or miracles, but from a quiet presence that refuses to leave, a reminder that kindness once given always finds its way back." The scene fades. The sound of rain lingers softly in the background. Then, a final shot, the clinic porch at dawn. A single bobcat sits watching the sunrise. His fur glows golden in the morning light. And though the world moves on, their story lingers, like the warmth of a heartbeat that never truly fades.